Hope for the world. That's how the United Nations Secretary-General described ships loaded with grain leaving Ukrainian ports. The UN chief was in Istanbul over the weekend, overseeing grain exports that are part of a Turkish broker deal reached earlier this month. So far, more than 700,000 tons have been shipped out of Ukraine. The visit followed a trilateral meeting Guterres held with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky in Lviv. President Erdogan helped forge the grain deal in late July, a move that has earned praise from Secretary-General Guterres, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and U.S. officials. After Russia launched its attack on Ukraine in late February, millions of tons of grain were stuck in silos, threatening global food supplies. But now, with grain shipments resuming, including to critical areas in the Middle East and Africa, fears of a widening food crisis have eased. And now to discuss the impact of Turkey's mediation efforts and the country's foreign policy outlook, joining me now from Kiev is Peter Zalmayev. He is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. And Valeria Giannotta from Rome. She is the scientific director, Observatory on Türkiye at the Center for International Politics. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So Turkey's mediation on a grain deal between Russia and Ukraine came at a time when European nations were scrambling to find ways to alleviate rising inflation, a looming food crisis, skyrocketing energy prices. So, Peter, how has that latest grain deal eased the West's concerns and alleviated fears of a global food crisis?
Well, obviously, this was something that just was a priority for the whole world. Basically, at stake were the lives of millions of people around the world, including in the Middle East and in Africa, and so this had to be done. Thanks to a large part, in a large part to the mediation of Turkey. At the same time, we once again see this strategy that is, that has roots in the Soviet era, the strategy that Putin's Russia is pursuing, and that is giving small concessions. I mean, this was not a terribly small concession, but still, Vladimir Putin is going to ask for a final price in this, and he is going to first try to save face. He does not want to be blamed for a worldwide food crisis. On the other hand, he will want whatever mediators come along, including Turkey, to try to force Ukraine to the negotiating table against its will. Right now, Vladimir Putin is not having victories on the battlefields in Ukraine. His army seems to be very exhausted. He needs a long pause to restore the fighting force.
Yes.
And for that, he wants to freeze the current status quo. And for that, he needs mediators. But, as Zelensky communicated to President Erdogan very clearly, we're not going to negotiate with Russia for as long as it continues to occupy our territory.
Yes. So, Valeria, what's your take? I mean, how will this deal bring relief and stability to global food markets? And do you think it has averted an imminent global food crisis, or we're still far from that?
Well, definitely it will give a great contribution to the crisis. And thanks once again to Turkey, which had which played a vital role, as the General Secretary Guterres said, because, Turkey and the West acknowledged that, and Turkey played a sort of neutrality for Ukraine, and it kept the channels open, both towards Moscow and Kiev, since the eruption of the crisis, something that the European Union and the international community did not do, actually. And thanks as well to the personal contacts of President Erdogan, who kept, the constant dialogue with the counterpart, Zelensky and Putin. So this was made, and I think it marked a big success for the international community as well. Of course, there is a big effort still to be done, and all the international community needs to share the burden and the responsibility to keep the corridor working, and as well to solve the crisis in the shortest period of time.
So, Peter, is this a sustainable deal? What outer factors could derail the deal? I mean, what are dangers ahead? Especially, there's been a talk on Russia stepping out its attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure and government buildings after the assassination of Alexander Dugin's daughter in Moscow.
Well, this is a very concerning development. They immediately blamed, when you're referring to this, incident, the explosion of the car in which Dugin's daughter was traveling. She was a known proponent of the so-called Eurasianism. It's essentially this idea that Russia must grow and continue to grow as an empire at the expense of its neighbors. She was a very, very, bright kind of example of, Putin's Russia, and this is exactly what has led to the situation in Ukraine. I believe that Vladimir Putin will not stop at anything for as long as he lives. He does not consider Ukraine as having the right to an independent country. He wants to destroy Ukraine as we know it. So whatever we're seeing right now, these are all various ways to try to achieve his goals through other means other than military, because the Russian army is simply too inefficient and part of a corrupt state that Russia is. It cannot be an exception to the rule. If Russia is corrupt, its army is corrupt and it's inept. But Vladimir Putin is very cunning, and he is trying to use all at his disposal, all methods of persuasion, including gas blackmail.
Yes.
Winter is coming. Winter is promising to be cold, and so Putin is banking on the fact that on a possibility that Ukraine's Western allies will simply give up and force Ukraine to the negotiating table to allow Putin a break to start again his aggression against Ukraine.
So, Valeria, you mentioned that the international community should also take responsibility for the well-being of this grain deal. What's the Western approach here? I mean, we know that the West is kind of skeptical towards Turkey's deepening cooperation with Russia in economic, military, and political domains. So, what do you think that is the West's roadmap in navigating its relations with Ankara?
Well, I think the approach is slightly changing. I mean, Turkey has been playing and is investing a lot in terms of credibility towards the West, towards the European Union and NATO partners as well. And as a matter of fact, Turkey is the only actor nowadays who is able, as I said before, to talk and to mediate and to put the both warring parties in the table. As well as Turkey is playing a critical role at the regional level too. I mean, since the disengagement of America from Middle East and in the region, and a lack of presence from the main international actors, the vacuum has been fulfilled by Ankara, by cooperating and by normalizing certain ties with the critical partners and historical partners and competitors as well, such as Armenia after the Nagorno-Karabakh war. And then we had been witnessing the normalization with Israel, and the dialogues are going on with Egypt behind the scenes, and already the normalization with the Gulf countries as well.
Yes.
So this means that Turkey is able to play a key role in the regional arena, but also at the global level as well.
So I just want to read a quote from the French newspaper Le Figaro that directly addressed Turkey's foreign policy approach. It said, Turkey has become a virtuoso of multipolarity. While being part of the Western Bloc, Turkey diversifies its alliances and is in constant dialogue even when interests are opposed. The balance of power it maintains has been mastered, and it is now needed by all and courted by all. So, Peter, is Turkey's message that it can cooperate with many countries that are often opposed to each other starting to resonate in the Western world?
Well, indeed, Turkey finds itself in a very unique spot. It's a very powerful member of NATO, and at the same time, it's a country that enjoys close relations with both sides in this conflict. There's no other country like that, and obviously President Erdogan is taking advantage of it. No matter what happens in this war, experts have said that Turkey is going to be a winner. It will have its diplomatic stature raised, as a result. There are some, at the very least, there are concerns on the part of Ukrainians, though. Obviously, the Bayraktar drones that have been provided to Ukraine, Ukrainians are hoping that it's not going to happen, that it will be selling it to Russia. This would be a step too far in the direction of any cooperation with Russia. There should be no military cooperation between the two sides, and I think Turkey understands that well. It made the right move when it closed the Bosphorus Strait in the early days of the war. It's supported Ukraine militarily, and it should be applauded for that. It's a tight kind of balancing act, and so far Turkey has done it quite ably.
So, Valeria, what do you think is behind the latest Turkish foreign policy push? You just mentioned that Ankara's normalization efforts with several Gulf and Arab countries. It lastly reconciled with Israel. I mean, is this move likely to be followed by other estranged nations like Egypt and Syria?
I think we are heading very interesting time. And at the end of the day, Turkey will be able to reach an agreement with Egypt. Regarding to Egypt, there is an ideological matter that has a stake in the dialogue. Like how Sisi, the Egyptian president, is not so keen to normalize as long as Turkey does not cut the ties with the so-called Muslim Brotherhood. But as well, this has to be taken into account from a regional perspective as well, because Egypt is strictly related to the situation in Libya and to the Eastern Mediterranean. So once all the region, all these pieces of the mosaic will be normalized, I think Egypt needs to come to terms with Turkey as well. And when we consider the situation in Syria, there are some domestic political issues that Ankara is going to play in the regard with Bashar al-Assad regime.
Yes.
I mean, we are nowadays in Turkey, there is a refugees crisis. I mean, there is a big refugees issue, and this has to be solved in the shortest term as possible. Also because we are heading a very critical electoral terms in 2023, and the main issues on the table that both the governing party and the opposition parties are going to touch are both economy and the refugee crisis too. So I think in the short term, we will see much development to this regard.
Yes, interesting times indeed. So Peter, could you talk to us about the nature of Turkish foreign policy when it comes to balancing between Ukraine and Russia? Is this sustainable given the uncertainty engulfing the globe right now?
Well, a lot will depend on Vladimir Putin's behavior, and Vladimir Putin has shown himself increasingly as an irrational actor. This war has gotten Russia nothing. It's gotten Russia stuck deep in this morass where its army has been shown as inept. Like I said, its weapons are no longer selling as well. According to latest figures, the sales of Russian weaponry, including to countries like Egypt and India, the biggest buyer, has dropped by 6 times. So it has done inestimable damage to Russia's prestige, Russia's authority, Russia's moral authority, moral standing. Russia has been ostracized, not evenly around the world, but people, are moving away from Russia. Europe is slowly but surely disconnecting itself from Russia's oil and gas. So what I'm leading to is that you have at some point you have to decide whether to continue putting hopes in any sort of solution with an actor who has shown himself to be irrational. So this will be a matter that Russians will have to solve for themselves.
All right, Valeria and Peter, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.